The goal for day one is to focus on optimizing 3 key areas of your local developer setup so as to maximize your efficiency, confidence, and comfort. Those 3 areas are your environment, the tools you use in that environment, and the version control platform that you use to take your creations, your code from within your environment and share it with the broader public world. A good analogy to use to think about this is a kitchen or a garage. Essentially, your garage is your environment is your garage. Within that garage, you have multiple tools, but they're not just sprawled all over the place, right? They are likely to be categorized and sorted and organized into toolboxes, drawers, cabinets, etc. And that's essentially what we want to do here. We want to organize our environment in a way that sets us up for success. All right, when you first open this up, you're going to see some shortcuts. You're going to see that you could use command tilde to expand and collapse your terminal. We could use command B to open and collapse our sidebar. And from here, we can go back to our terminal and set up our workspace, because this is the most critical thing. We will be using this directory for the rest of the cohort, and we save it as a workspace so as to save the settings that we set. And if you were to mess up your environment in any way, or if you want to export it, take it to another machine, or even if you need to create multiple workspaces to be able to context switch between different projects, that's what workspaces are for. So let's start by taking a look at what we have here. ls is list, tilde is a symbol to represent your home directory. I will do my best to be brief and short about this. By the way, if you haven't noticed, there's nobody here because yesterday, first day of class was a little chaotic and I had forgotten to enable the recording. So I want to go over the key takeaways from yesterday for anyone that needs it and for the students that weren't able to make it to the first day of class. Let's begin. So I am making a directory. This is going to serve as my project directory. I'm going to call it something like AI Cloud Ops, whatever works for you, as long as it's something that you can remember and as long as it's something that's not a pain to type, because you'll be typing it repeatedly over and over, very likely. Though tools like tab for autocomplete do help in cases where we have like very long names, right? If I were to try to go into this directory, I could just hit tab to autocomplete. Sorry, I'm in the wrong directory. Let me go in here, tab to autocomplete. So if I were to go to AI Cloud Ops, tab autocomplete will show you all of the options from the letter you're currently at. So when you reach a point where there's only one remaining option, tab will autocomplete. So the one that I made for this example is AI Cloud Ops. So let's go in there. Actually, is that the one that I want? Code Platoon. Yes, it is. AI Cloud Ops. That's what I did up there. So I make this directory. I'm going to use Command K to clear my screen. I'm going to use an ls to show that there's nothing here. If I did use an LSA, which shows hidden files, we could see additional symbols, a period and a double period. These represent the present working directory and the working directory above. This is actually my third time running through this. I did actually record a video prior to this, only to find out at the end that the microphone was off. So I am going to try and avoid going into too much detail. We could always talk about this more in the future. I do want to at least touch upon a key point that I made yesterday and that I'm going to make now, and it's that Linux as an operating system, as a system in general, is really not that complex or scary, right? If you break it down to its simplest, purest form, there's an elegance to its design, like a recursiveness, basically, where we really only have a pattern, a single pattern that repeats over and over and over again. And that's the pattern of having only two categories of entities. One is a file, one is a directory, and they serve very different purposes, but they're entirely reusable over and over, right? You can open files, but you can't enter them. You can enter directories, but you can't open them. Maybe not the best choice of words, but you get what I mean, right? They have a distinct purpose, and an entity is either going to be one of the two. So I say this because I want you to start thinking about the structure of these directories and subdirectories like a tree. If I were to do ls, pwd, we see that I'm, 3 directories deep in from the root directory of this machine. If I do an ls with // is the symbol to represent the root of the machine, I see these root folders. What else do I see? I see that users directory, and if I do an ls from this symbol, which, by the way, this is how you start an absolute path. Basically, that just refers to path with a concrete starting point. I would, versus a relative path, which we'll go into more detail later on. I am gonna see that if I tap autocomplete from here, I can see my name popping up. That, by the way, is an entirely different tool that will be installed today as well. That's called zsh-auto-complete. And we'll get to the extensions and the casks in just a sec. We are going to finish our folder setup, and we are going to do that by creating 2 directories, right? We're going to create a projects directory. This is where you can create all of the subfolders for the projects that you're going to run, and these can be anything from small labs to things that you might want to demo on your machine, or projects that you clone down. We'll also want a notes directory to contain all of our cheat sheets, notes, scratch pads, if you just need to hold on to data very temporarily. Notice that I am passing 2 arguments to mkdir. Not all commands are created equal, so not all commands support this. mkdir does. For this particular argument, I can pass in multiple values. So if I hit enter, I do an ls, I see that both the projects and notes directories were created. Okay, this is pretty much close to where I want this to be, right? We have projects, we have notes. This is also where we're gonna put the curriculum, and we'll save that for last because it's probably the more complicated, most complicated thing that we go over on day 1. And we're just gonna try to breeze through some of the extensions and casks that we install otherwise. All right, so I'm gonna save my workspace again so that it's reusable and it's backed up. I'm gonna name it something that makes sense, AI Cloud Ops, save it in my workspace. Let's pretend it doesn't already exist and I saved it. From here, we can start to play around with the tools that we'll be creating. I'm not gonna go over a lot of the install fest on day 1 because that was relatively smooth this time around. I'm gonna try to focus on the things that seem to give students the most trouble. So one thing that gave people trouble was Ollama. The reason being, it's instructions aren't very clear, and we'll see that if I do a brew uninstall Ollama and reinstall it again. So it's uninstalled. Let me do a brew install Ollama. By the way, Llama is Facebook's AI model, and Ollama is the open source version of that. So what did I say about this being confusing, right? It just throws a lot of letters and characters at you. It wants you to do this, so I don't know why it sandwiches it between all this other junk. So if you miss this, that's not on you, it's just on the developers that wrote this. But basically what this is telling you is that you have two options here. You could either start Ollama using your brew services restart pattern, and this will essentially ensure that Ollama starts up every time you start up a new session. Whereas this will set up an Ollama service temporarily in the session that you're currently in. I like to have it available at all times, so I'm going to go ahead and run brew services start Ollama. Now from here, if it's your first time, what happened here? All right, I might have to do some troubleshooting here. What is this? Not quite sure what's going on with this. I think it's gonna. Let's try updating it. Shit. I think I know what I did. Real quick, let's go to back up to .git. Load. Let's see if it likes all of that. Okay, is this still cleaning? I don't know. I don't know what it's highlighting itself for, but let me try this again. Okay. So, right, because I ran brew services restart Ollama, it's going to start every time I start a new terminal session, so that's why it has started. Okay, so did I clear my screen? That was on the other one. All right, I might as well mention it here, but move, like its name implies, is used for moving files, but notice that I also use it to rename something, right? My environment was yelling at me because I did some funky stuff earlier. I renamed the .git directory to .git backup, and then I remembered I did that, so I undid it, and now it's happy. Okay, so we're back to Ollama, and now that we have Ollama set up, we can do an Ollama pull, and this is where we would pass in a model that we could look up inside of the Ollama library. And if you already have a model, it's not going to do anything. But basically, if we pretend that I don't have this already and I pull it down, it's going to take a while to do its thing. And once I pull it down, then I can run it. So git, Ollama run quen3. Okay, so let's see, does it work? Yep, and it's thinking, so cool. We know that it works. That should be it, because I think what students were struggling with the most was that poorly placed command. And from here, we can start to look at some other tools. We want to install notes, and this threw a lot of students off yesterday as well because the README had the wrong name. It's since been corrected, but basically this is the notes that you want. It's not super popular, it's not like it's in the millions, but it's highly rated and it's more popular than a lot of the alternative options. Once you install this, you should see something like this, a new icon, a new subpanel. Your Explorer really consists of multiple panels and subpanels, and you can move them around to suit your tastes. So if I move this here, this is how I like it. My notes are available along with my files. And you probably won't have this in here, right? I'm going to copy this and paste it. Cool, it's in there. I'll talk about that in a sec. This actually, I lose that example. This was done in a very particular way. Yeah, let me just get rid of that. Ask me to confirm. I say yes. And from here, I can select the location, right? If I hit this button, it's going to open up my settings, and I can set a path down here. The README says to insert something like notes.folder inside of your settings. If I use my command palette to open up my user settings in JSON form, it would look something like this. That's one way to add your path. You could also do it through the way that we saw before, where I just clicked on select location. You could also click on this gear button. Either way, you want to use a path that you'll dedicate solely for your notes, right? So for our example, I went into AI Cloud Ops, and this is where I created my notes directory. So I can use pwd, present working directory, to grab my present working directory. So I could copy paste it, and now this is going to be the path that I use for my notes. And it's complaining about me changing the path. Let it complain. I'm going to use my command shift P again. This is my command palette to reload my window. Now that it's reloaded, again, here's an instance of not the best design. It looks like it didn't save my location, but it did. So what you can do when you're at this point is just go ahead and make another folder. I'm going to make this cheat sheets. This is going to contain my cheat sheets. You don't have to pass in the extension. It does that for you. It's always going to be marked down. And now that I have my, that's the wrong one. This is also wrong. I got rid of that. Now that I have my folder, I could create a new file. Let's do one for keyboard shortcuts. And I'm going to use this particular keyboard shortcut, Command-Shift-C, which comes with Maccy, one of the extensions that we will be installing, or sorry, Cask that we'll install. And I'm going to select the notes that I copied earlier. So what Maccy is it allows you to select from previously copied values. It's a clipboard manager. Very handy. Very much recommend using it. Every once in a while, you could just clear your settings to get rid of all the junk. And let's just go over some of these. If I hit this command /, that's commenting and uncommenting. If we look at the preview, by the way, this was Command-Shift-V, and that's how you preview any Markdown file. Notice how the formatting here is different from the formatting here, because I commented out these triple backticks. The triple backticks are used to create a code box inside of your Markdown file, and it's going to render the contents a little differently. You could actually have it render by different languages. So if I made JSON, I'm not going to update this to be a JSON, but notice, for example, it's changing the syntax highlighting. We use empty for Markdown. That's how I like to organize my notes. And I also encourage those of you who are willing to go the extra mile to start getting in the habits of organizing your notes in this manner, because this is good practice if you want to get into a DevOps role, because in many support engineering roles, writing documentation is very important. I mean, it's even important for software developers. So get in the habit of learning Markdown and Markdown syntax, and it will only help you in your career down the line. Okay, so what else do we have here? We have Command D to duplicate the cursor. This is where I had a really good example that I'm not really interested in repeating, but maybe I will. So I'm going to make another file called Ollama. I'm going to make an Ollama cheat sheet. I could have waited until I pulled down the repository, but I'm just going to pull from here for now. What I'm looking for are some of the notes inside of here, and basically this is sort of the pattern that I want you to follow. When you see something useful inside any of these readmes, toss them into your notes. So for our install fest, when we went and installed Ollama, there were all of these commands that I could just very quickly copy and paste into my cheat sheet. Now, this is a matter of preference, but how I like to have this formatted is not like this. It's really loud to have all of these headers above these single lines of code. So, first I'm going to wrap this inside of a code box. I'm using Command and my arrows to move around quickly. And I'm going to hold Shift to select multiple lines. I'm going to Command Shift V again to look at my preview. All right, we're getting somewhere. Cool. I set it to Markdown, so now it's highlighting these headers. But I don't actually want these as headers. I want them in a very particular format. So I'm going to use Command D to duplicate my cursor selection. And once I have all of these selected, I'm going to move it down one, and then I'm going to delete the new lines before these, and then I'm going to hit Tab a few times. And what this results in, with maybe some additional like cleanup, is a format that I like, right? So everything's kind of vertically aligned, clean. This got messed up somehow. Oh, I probably, just for the sake of the example, I think this is the one that had like 2 hashes. Okay. Now if I preview this, it's in a format that I like. Now I can try to resist the urge to do this, but I'm doing it anyway. Do some final cleanup, and then I'm going to save it. Okay. From here, we have duplicate cursor by line. So slightly different from that is option command up or down, and that lets you duplicate your cursor line by line. All right, chorded shortcuts. This might take a while to get the hang of, but basically, when you press Command K, it starts a chord, and you can see here, it shows for a while that we're waiting for a second key of the chord. If I do a Command K 0, it's going to collapse everything under the first header. I could do a Command K J to expand, Command K 2 to collapse down to the double hashtag headers, and that comes in handy, especially when you're working with long chunks of code. Okay, what else? We talked about tab to autocomplete. We talked about Command K to clear. Control R for reverse search. This is a pretty handy tool. When you do Control R and you start to type, like let's say you don't remember what a command is, you could use this to try and get to where you're trying to go, right? And you could use Control R repeatedly to cycle through your different options. So that's Control R, it's reverse search. All right. So we are done with this. I'm going to close that. I closed that with Command W after using Command S to save. All right, where are we at? Let's take a look at our Sidebar Markdown Notes. We looked at one notes extension. There is another one that I do recommend. I forgot to put it into the README, but I'm going to mention it here because I do think it's handy. It's called Sidebar Markdown Notes. Not as popular as the other notes, but it has its uses. This sits permanently inside of your sidebar. Unlike these notes, these are not saved anywhere. So this is good for temporary commands, right? Like maybe you could keep a URL down here that you command click anytime. So you could put shortcuts here, basically. You could move between different pages, and it persists within your workspace. So we talked about directory setup, we talked about workspace saving, keyboard shortcuts, we've installed Ollama, we have talked about Maccy, but we didn't talk about how to install it, right? So let's talk about Brew and Brew casks. Casks are essentially Brew packages, and when you install them, you just install them by running Brew and the name of the cask. So Brew install Maccy. If you look for Maccy through the App Store, you will notice that it is not free. They want to charge you $10 for it. So don't do that. Just get it through Homebrew, and it's yours for free. Once it's installed, all you have to do is search for it and open it. And once it's open and running in the background, then you could just Command-Shift-C anytime, and also use it to cycle, also use these shortcuts to select different lines from your clipboard. And it's a very handy little tool. So let's clear that. I don't need any of that anymore. That's Maccy. Let's also do a Brew install Autojump. Pretend it's not already installed. It already is for me. It's going to tell you to add a few lines of code to some files. This is where we can talk about shell source files. So if I do a code using my tilde symbol to my zsh-rc, that's going to open up my zsh configuration file. This is the configuration file by default. We use source to load a file into a terminal and execute it. And this pattern is something that I just made up because I wanted to separate the different parts of my configuration into very clearly defined purposes, right? So we're looking right now for where we want to put in the lines of code that Autojump wants you to set up, right? I believe for me that's going to be inside of .zsh. I know one of them is going to be in plugins. Yep. It didn't show it for me because it's already installed, but when you install this for the first time, it's going to tell you to paste this somewhere. And it's also going to tell you to paste, maybe it's in config. I forget where I put it. I don't even know why I separated it. Yes, it's inside of here. It's also going to tell you to paste this somewhere. Do they need to be in different locations? No. They could all actually just go inside of your zsh-rc. But again, what we're doing here is we're learning how to modify our environment to suit our tastes, right? So for me, I like to have clear separation for these things, and that's why I have mine structured the way that I do. You do not have to follow this pattern. Follow a pattern that works for you. Okay, let's talk about aliases then, because we've already gotten into the subject, and there are some handy ones that I'd like you to see. So if I open up my aliases file, I separated them by usefulness to all of you versus me. Like, this is all essentially, I was about to say junk. It's not really junk, but it's not useful to the context that we're going to be working in, right? So one of the handiest things you could do is assign an alias to a source command that sources your zsh configuration file. And that is how you reload your terminal. You could also assign an alias to another alias. So if I wanted to reload my terminal with some shorthand, I could just type RL. Notice here that RL maps to reload, which maps to this command. We have some other simple aliases here, like mapping pip3 and python3 to pip and python. We'll talk about this later, but basically Python 2 and Python 3 they coexist as very different versions of Python, and it's not backwards compatible. So if you're trying to run a Python 3 command or a file, and for whatever reason your interpreter, you still have Python 3 and 2 installed on the same machine, your interpreter might think you're trying to call Python 2, when in reality you want to call Python 3, right? So you would have to type pip3 and Python 3 every time you use those commands. This is a convenience approach to not having to do that. zsh-rc, instead of source, we're using code to open up this configuration file, right? So very handy, just a very fast way to open up your configuration file so you can edit it again. And then it looks like I have this zsh-all that opens up all my zsh configuration files. Okay, so we've talked about Autojump. I showed you where to drop those lines of code. Autocomplete and syntax highlighting are the same. They will also ask you to drop some lines of code into your configuration. So let's go back to, I'm actually going to show you up here in my editor. If I use Command-Shift-T, I can reopen up the files that I had just closed. So it's pretty handy if you mindlessly exit a file and you realize, oh, I forgot something. Command-Shift-T does that. Now, these are lines of code that syntax highlighting and auto-suggestions is going to ask you to paste. Again, you can just paste it in your root shell source file, or you can do something a little more fancy if you are so inclined. All right, so syntax highlighting, that's what we're seeing here, right? S is red because it's not a command. It's only when I finish an actual command that it's gonna be happy and turn green. This light text here that I did not type out, that is autocomplete. It looks through the commands that I've run in the past, and it either pulls the most recent one it finds or the one that you use the most. I can't remember which, but if this is the one that I want, I can hit right to complete it. All right. Did not mean to do that. Let's see what happened here. If you want to close a terminal, you can just right click, kill terminal, and oh, like that was throwing me off earlier. I was like wondering why that was red. I customized it that way. It's the active screen, apparently. Okay, we've covered these two. Let's go ahead and also just cover wget and catimg. These are not super useful, but they can come in handy. Wget allows you to grab a file from anywhere. Images in particular, you can download them as the file type that you want, right? So, for example, if I wanted a PNG of Doge, I would type wget -o for output. The output is going to be the file name and file type, and then the URL that we're going to be grabbing this from. So this is going to convert a JPEG to a PNG. This is especially handy for websites that automatically convert image files into WebP, which a lot of image editors, especially the ones that are pre-built into a system, may not necessarily support, right? So that's what that is for. And to complement it is catimg. If I write a catimg on the image that I just downloaded, it's gonna load it in my terminal. And it's gonna load it as, what is that, ASCII text, characters, essentially. Kind of cool, right? Okay, so that's catimg and wget. These are very simple. You would just brew install either of them. They do not require any additional setup. Once they're installed, you're good to go. Same with tree. This is another simple cask to install, and it can be very handy. What tree does is it prints the file and folder tree of your system. Notice how it guessed that I wanted to type in git ignore. If you are in a Git repository, like you're working on a project, you could use git ignore to tell it to ignore all of the files that you might not necessarily want to look at, right? And this is very handy because oftentimes you'll have packages that are unpacked, modules, nodes, things like that, that will have a lot of unpacked files that you do not want to sift through. It's just gonna clutter and maybe even destroy your terminal. So I, by default, just almost always pass in git ignore, even if I'm not really working in a Git project. It's forced a habit for me. So we see a very simple tree here. Let's go back to Autojump. I just realized I never even demoed Autojump. I'm gonna Autojump into, I don't know, day one of the curriculum, and look, I just magically jumped from wherever I was at to this location. So instead of having to type this long file path, I could use Autojump to teleport to another location. And it does this by keeping track of the areas that you navigate through, right? So it's not like you have to maintain this in any way. It's not going to be a lot of additional work. It does all of that for you. It tracks the most important folders for you based on how often you use them, and it will teleport you to them when you pass in just a few characters, right? So let's go back to AI Cloud Ops. Now, it does take a bit of, I don't know the word, intention. Yet you need to be deliberate about how you name your files and your folder structures, because otherwise you might be teleported to the wrong location. I'm playing around with a bunch of like folders that I've just created today for the sake of this demonstration, so it doesn't know that I want to go to AI Cloud Ops. But again, it tracks the locations you use the most. So if this was my real project directory, it would very likely know that this is where I want to go, right? So that's Autojump. Let's cross that off the list. What else do we have left? We've talked about notes. We've talked about sidebar notes. Indent Rainbow is fairly easy to set up. Let's look at that. Indent Rainbow. This just creates a magical little rainbow to make it a little easier on the eyes to line up indentations, just like the name suggests. Very handy for very deeply nested files with a lot of indents and brackets. It helps you find the right opening bracket to the right closing bracket, and it's very lightweight. A lot of these extensions are lightweight. They really just serve the purpose of making your life easier and not requiring a lot of setup from you, really. Setting cycler is a little complex. I think I'd rather demo this in class, so let's revisit that another time. Hex editor, we're not going to be using much. I'm just going to cross that off the list for now. And that means we're now ready to do GitHub. So I am in the project. No, this is not the one that we made. For this demo, we went into AI-Cloud Ops. We confirm that this is the one because there's only the notes and projects here. We have yet to clone down our curriculum. Now, a lot of students were running into an issue yesterday with authentication, and I can't really demo it here because if I try to clone down the repository, it's not going to complain because I'm properly authenticated. So I'll try to describe what you would see if you were running into this issue. If I do a git clone of this URL that I grabbed from the curriculum repository, look for the big green button, look for copy URL. It's going to clone down this repository down to my local machine. Now, this is where it was complaining for a lot of students that there were, forget the exact message, some kind of authentication failure. And this is kind of just another example of bad design, because if you're not authenticated, your terminal is going to ask you for your GitHub username and password. But if you try to type in your password, it's going to immediately reject it and say, passwords have been deprecated. We no longer use those. So what you're supposed to do is go to your GitHub, go to your settings, go to the left, scroll all the way down to developer settings, and create a personal access token. With your personal access token, you are able to select the permissions, the scopes that you want to allow for whoever uses this token. for our use case, we want repo. We'll be working with workflows eventually. I do think we need admin to get into this organization where the code is stored. What else? Just is handy. Maybe you might need to delete a repo, so yeah, sure, let's add that. Let's add code space. Not sure if we're going to use it. Same with Copilot. But it's here if you want to play around with it, right? So let's go ahead, select it. Let's also give it a name. Code Platoon Day 1 Demo 3. And we could set an expiration date, right? So once you generate your token, it's going to warn you that this is the only time you'll ever see this token in its present state. So you better back it up if you don't want to lose it, right? So let's hit that copy button. Where do you want to save it? Find a pattern that works for you. I like to save and store all of my keys and API keys in a spreadsheet. Not the most secure thing, but I'm also not going to open up a Vault account just for my personal stuff. So I'm going to toss this into maybe my notes. Why not, right? So, well, the answer to why not is probably because it's not very secure. But for the sake of this demonstration, this is what we're going to do, right? So API key, I guess, is this new folder. And I'm going to say GitHub token. I don't know why I called it API key. But I'm storing this token. Don't bother copying it down because I'm just going to delete it anyway. And this is what you use instead of passwords. So when you clone down your repository, and again, this is where Maccy really comes in handy. So I could just use Maccy to grab that URL again, git clone. Let's use our imagination to pretend that it's complaining and yelling at me about my authentication. This is where I could also use Maccy to go back to my token and paste it when I'm prompted for my password. So that is cloning, and that is creating a personal access token. So let's cross those off the list. And I'm debating whether or not I want to go through the rest. I do. So now that we have our curriculum, I'm gonna go inside. I'm gonna navigate through these files using my tab to autocomplete. Also just typing in characters when I need to guide it, when I need to steer it. And we're gonna look inside of lessons. And what I'm looking for right now is a URL. So it's actually not in lessons, it's in labs. And it should be in the first. I did this earlier too. I'm trying to tab autocomplete into this file, but like I mentioned earlier, you can't change directory into a file, right? So let me just remove this command. And what am I actually trying to do? I'm actually trying to open a file. So I'm going to use code. I'm going to now tab to find the file that I want. And inside of this file, what I am looking for is this example. I know it's in here. Yes, this example here. Okay. That's a typo, sorry. It's supposed to be AICO Delta student, so if you ran into that, I apologize. I think we talked about Git versus GH, and if we haven't, real quick, basically they're both command line tools to interact with GitHub that serve different purposes. They're not intended to compete with one another. They're intended to complement one another. Git is what you're going to use for more precise manipulation of your Git repository. So checking your commit histories, doing things like visualizing your commit history, checking a status on your local repo, things like that, adding files, removing, pushing, committing, etc. GH is more of a comfort tool, so it allows us to do things with less abstraction, right? So instead of having to run git, well, you actually can't even create a git fork, or sorry, you can't even create a fork using git. So again, they complement one another. They are able to sometimes do things that the other one can't, or maybe in most cases do things that the other one can't, right? So let's create a fork of this repository, and we're going to do that using gh, and we are going to say clone false, just so we could demo making the clone another way. And I already did this earlier in a previous run through this demo, so it already exists. And now that the fork exists, I don't know why I did this again. Now that the fork exists, I can clone down my fork. So I'm going to git clone, maybe go ahead and finish that, and just replace Platoon, because I don't want the source repository. I want my fork of this repository. So I'm going to toss in my username. Is this my username? And I am going to update this path as well, because we're not working with this repository. We're working with AICO Delta students. So git clone that. Now if I do another ls, I should see it. I just realized I forgot something. I was supposed to do this inside of my projects directory, not at the root. My bad. Because we want to stay organized, right? So I can remedy this just simply by moving the directory. So I'm going to move this directory into projects using move. And I think this should work, but I also don't want to risk renaming it, right? Because we saw earlier that we could use move to rename, and as a creature of habit, why I don't know if this will fail or work is because I always just type out the full path and file/folder name anyway. So I'm going to do that. It's not going to take that much longer. I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to hit ls. We see that it's no longer here. If I go into projects, we should see it here. Okay, so this is my clone of my fork, and if I do a git remote --v, we see that my origin is my fork. We always, whatever you clone down from, be it the source or the fork, that's going to be your origin, right? That's going to be the default name that is used. You can pass in an argument to change that name, but why would you? Most cases you don't need to do that. So best practices for Git, because it can be overwhelming at first with all the commands, all the different layers, is often to have and utilize its abstraction points, right? So it might seem redundant to have a fork in addition to a clone, in addition to branches, but these were designed intentionally, right? This might be a little easier to explain if I go to the lesson, so I could pull up these images that I made. No, this is the project directory. I am going to go up one directory. I'm going to go to the curriculum. I'm going to select module 1. I'm going to select week 1. I'm going to select day 1. If you all get sick of navigating these folder hierarchies, you're not alone. But hey, Short-term pain for long-term gain, right? This builds muscle memory. Okay, so I am inside of my module 1, week 1, day 1, and I was looking for this lesson, the Git lesson, which starts with a 3. And Command-Shift-V to preview, scroll down. Now we could talk about forks versus clones versus branches. Repositories exist on GitHub servers. There can be many repositories. They belong to an organization. Your account essentially also acts as an organization. Forks are, in their simplest form, a copy of a repository, but in reality, it's a little more nuanced than that, right? Because there's a relationship between the fork and the repository. Like they have the ability to sync and be in harmony with one another. We can't do that with two repositories that are entirely unrelated, right? You can't pull from this repository, at this repository from another repository that's completely unrelated. And you technically could, like, even if you copied that repository, right? Like you grabbed it code for code, like you cloned it down, and then you made a new repo with that exact same code, they still wouldn't be synced. They wouldn't be linked in any way. That's essentially why forks are what they are, right? It's kind of like a divergence in the journey of this source repository's evolution. And how is that different from clones and branches? Well, for one, they don't exist within each other. They exist alongside each other. But within the repository and the fork, you could have multiple branches. And again, each branch is just another instance of the same code with variations that were made inside of that branch. Just like how the variations made inside of a fork only exist in that fork until it's synced with the repository that it belongs to. Same with branches. You could sync data from one branch to another branch and so on and so forth. Now, where does a clone fit into all of this? We've talked about the repository being on the GitHub servers. Forks are also remotes. You don't have a fork on your local machine. You have a clone on your local machine, right? So clones are local. Repositories and forks are remote. Now, you can do the same thing. You can sync from a branch locally to a branch remotely. And we do this through the various git commands, right? Like git pull, git push, git commit, etc. This was asked yesterday because I understand it can be very hard to wrap your head around this. I remember for my cohort, we were all very, very much confused by Git when we were first introduced to it. It's absolutely normal. So it was asked yesterday, well, what's the difference still between branches and forks and clones if they're all just instances of the same code? This is where GitHub as a platform really shines, right? Like I was mentioning earlier, this design is very intentional. If we think about all of these as just being different instances of the same code base, they are different instances with different purposes. You can have multiple branches within a fork. You can't have multiple forks of a repository. You can have multiple clones of a fork or repository, not that it will serve you any real benefit because you can't sync a local clone to another clone. You would have to do twice the work to sync the local data to the remote data. So there's not many reasons to do this. Maybe you would do this if you like obliterate your original code by just like totally messing it up, like just deleting branches and deleting branch histories and just doing all sorts of things you're not supposed to be doing. In that case, you might want to create another clone of another repo. But if you're comfortable and confident and competent with your Git skills, you should be able to revert yourself back to any healthy state, right? Let's see. So one way to summarize all that, one way to think about this is we can think about branches as duplicating in a horizontal direction, whereas cloning and forking is duplicating in a vertical direction. So you have your repository, your fork, and your clone on your local machine. And this is why we sometimes, or why we commonly would name a remote to a source repository as an upstream, because I said earlier, right, that whatever you fork from is going to be your origin. Let me do a git remote -v. I actually think -v works. I just by habit do the double dash. We see that my origin is my fork. Now, best practice is to use your fork as a layer of separation. You're essentially preparing the code that you changed to be merged with the code of your colleagues from their forks into the main repository. Because if you were to push straight to the repository, just completely bypassing the fork, you might push to the same branch that one of your colleagues is pushing to, and that would cause merge conflicts. So best practices are to use your fork as a dedicated layer of separation. You can also think of it as a backup. Again, let's go back to this example of like maybe you just totally obliterated your local clone. Well, your changes that you've so painstakingly crafted aren't going to exist in the repository. You can't pull those changes from there. So good thing you made a fork and backed them up somewhere. You could pull from your fork instead. So generally, you'll be pulling from your fork. You will push to it when you have updates, but that's, sorry, I'm saying that backwards. Generally, you'll be pushing to your fork. You'll be updating your fork with your local changes. And it's the source repository that you would be pulling from primarily to sync your data. When you push changes to a fork, it can open up a pull request that pushes those changes to your repository. So it's almost as if you're never pushing to the source repository from your clone. You're doing it through the fork. Okay. If that's still confusing, that's all right. That's to be expected. It's going to be through repetition and first-hand experience that you'll really get a grasp and a feel for this. So let's just finish the rest of this example. I'm going to do a git remote add. And I can't use origin because it's already used. And I'm going to name this upstream. And this upstream is going to be the source repository. So now if I do a git remote -v, I can see both the fork and the source repository. Platoon DevOps, JDC, Bautista. So that is another item off our list. Repo versus fork versus clone. We have forked this down, so we're done with that as well. We added a URL, so we're done with that also. I'll demo this again in class another time, but basically let's talk about real quick the difference between Git and GH. That's supposed to be GH, not GitHub. When you create a repository with Git, it's only going to exist locally. You run git init, it creates a .git directory with all of your Git configuration files, but you have no way of getting that to a remote location. You would have to go to your browser, create a new repo, name it the same thing as your local repo. You would then grab that URL and you would add that as a remote to the repository you've created with Git, and then you would pull to ensure that you sync data, and then you would push to ensure that you sync data, and if there's any conflicts, you'll resolve those merge conflicts, and then you're done. That's how you create a new repo, public repo or private repo, external repo with the git command. With gh, let me go to my projects, let me make a gh example, and also cd into that. When you use gh, repo creates, it allows you to create a repository in a fraction of the time, and it lets you do so through an interactive session in your terminal, right? So very much more convenient and easier to use than Git, but also used for different purposes, right? If I want to create a new repository, I just give a name, git or gh example, which is what I name the folder. I select an organization, I give it a description, I set some privacy. Here we could see a default option. Whatever is capitalized is going to be your default option. So if I hit no, it says like selects no, or sorry, if I hit enter with no value typed in, it's going to respond as no. And same with this. If I leave it blank, it's going to be yes. And it's only complaining because I've made this same repo in the earlier repository. But let's pretend that's a success message. That was done in a fraction of the time it would have taken to create a repo with Git. Okay, I'll demo it in class another time so you could see, maybe actually just run it through yourselves. And you could see firsthand for yourself how much faster GH is. So really the point of this is there are differences to each command, and it is through using each command, each tool, each command line, sets of commands that you will develop a feel for when to use them, how to use them, and how to recall them. Until then, you have your notes. So utilize your notes intelligently. Keep track of the shortcuts, the commands that you'll be using over and over again, and you'll be set up to get through all of the challenges that we throw at you in as efficient of a manner as possible. Okay, cool. That should be it. I will, if you missed class yesterday, then welcome to the cohort, and I will see you on Saturday.